wherein the defendant, Christine Ricci, is charged with the crime of murder. Is she guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
It's the case of the Massachusetts woman who went on trial for brutally stabbing to death her husband after he had an affair. Time to recap the biggest moments from the Christine Ricci trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, so we're going to be continuing our trial recap series for you, and this time it concerns Christine Ricci. She is the woman who went on trial for killing her husband, Michael Ricci, back in September of 2021. Charges of second-degree murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, after prosecutors had argued both mental health issues and a prior affair drove her to kill Michael in a heated altercation, stabbed him in the heart. Now, Ricci's defense had argued that she was just trying to harm herself and that this was an accident, that Michael was killed accidentally in this struggle. Well, this heated encounter occurred on the evening of January 28th, 2021 in the couple's home in Marshfield. This is a town just south of Boston. And prosecutors argued that Ricci, who was fueled, they say, by jealousy and rage over her husband's extramarital affair, stabbed him to death. Now, the couple's last few years of marriage, they were plagued by frequent altercations. And witnesses testified that they saw Michael with visible scratches, a black eye, a busted lip. Prosecutors alleged that Ricci was unable to move on from her husband's affair, which happened in 2018, and she constantly hounded him over it. Well, following Michael's death, Ricci told investigators that she and Michael, they were arguing on the day of his death and that she was having a manic episode. And Ricci said she grabbed a steak knife to scare him off, but then he lunged at her, which she says made the knife penetrate his chest. The couple's 16-year-old daughter was actually home when this happened, and she was the one who called 911. Police responded to the scene. They rushed Michael to the hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. He was a U.S. Army veteran, worked as a firefighter with the Boston Fire Department for 23 years. So with all of that in mind, it's time to recap the trial for you. And the trial officially began on July 25th with opening statements. And this is where prosecutor Shannon Buckingham described Ricci's emotions as slowly boiling over until it came to a head on that fateful January evening.
This affair was like a pot of water simmering on a stove. And over the period of time between 2018 and January of 2021, the defendant continued to turn up the heat on that pot by bringing up that affair over and over until that simmering pot of anger, jealousy, and control boiled over on January 28, 2021. On this particular afternoon, Michael goes to Dunkin' Donuts in the afternoon, gets a coffee, comes home. He's doing some shoveling outside before coming into the house, meeting the defendant, his wife, in yet another argument. The children will testify and tell you that arguments were frequent in the household and that arguments were always about the same thing, the affair. On this particular day, Sophia will tell you that she could hear her parents arguing when she was up in her room after school, but that was pretty much normal for her at that point. On this particular day, it was particularly loud, and she did everything she could to try to tune them out. Until later in that afternoon, when her mother, the defendant, yelled her name, yelled for her to come down. Sophia comes down the stairs, goes into the area in between the dining room and the living area to find her dad on the floor and the defendant standing over him. The defendant tells her to call 911. Sophia calls 911. You're going to hear the 911. You're going to hear Sophia's testimony about what she recalls that day. The Marshfield police arrive at their home on Moraine Street. They're the first ones to arrive, you'll hear. And when they arrive, the defendant tells the first officers that Michael suddenly collapsed. The paramedics immediately advise the police, who are inside with the defendant. And it's at that point, and only that point, you'll hear, that the defendant tells the officers that she had been in an argument with her husband, with Michael. She tells him she was scared, she grabbed a knife to scare him, and that when he lunged at her, the knife just went in his chest. You will hear from a medical examiner in this case more about that fatal chest wound and what the details of that wound, how deep it was, what kind of injury it caused, what damage it did to Michael's body, and what resulted in his death.
Now, Ricci's defense attorney, Joshua Wood, took a different approach. He told the jury that she never intended to kill her husband. Remember, she was trying to hurt herself when this happened, and this was an accident, that she was in such a state of distress that she couldn't even recall what happened on the day of the stabbing.
Christine Ricci never intended to kill Michael Ricci on January 28, 2021, and the Commonwealth doesn't have any evidence to prove that she did. The argument that occurred that was just described to you, the confrontation that was just described to you, all of that information all happened during about a small 15-minute pocket between 4:30 and 4:45 on January 28, 2021. And every answer to every question that we have about Christine's intent, Michael's intent, Michael's last actions and Christine's actions are contained and sealed in that 15-minute pocket. Christine's words are really the only evidence that we have of what occurred during that 15-minute pocket. And those words, remember, were spoken in the moments after all of these events happened. It's true that she doesn't give a complete statement of everything that occurs, and as we go through the evidence in this case, and when I come back and talk to you at the end, I'm going to suggest to you, through reference to both the forensic evidence as well as putting together the statements, about what probably happened around and between the details of what it was that she said. When the police arrive, the evidence is going to be that Christine Ricci is absolutely beside herself. Absolutely beside herself. She is crying, she is heaving, she is hyperventilating. The first responders come to the scene and she can get almost nothing out. She says he collapsed, that comes out. The Commonwealth wants it to be the case that that means that she told some sort of misleading statement. The evidence is going to show that she gave an incomplete statement and that maybe she wasn't in a position where she even could give a complete statement. She was just too upset.
Hey there, everybody. So I want to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this episode of Sidebar. Always love talking about them. Now, here is the incredible thing about Morgan & Morgan, and one of the reasons why I like talking about them so much.
Hey, say something about our big wins.
You're not supposed to come on camera. The reason Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm, is so big, and I'm sure you can guess it, is because they win a lot. And that's
Don't forget huge verdicts.
Yeah, they've won big verdicts, $6.8 million in New York, $26 million in Philadelphia. You see, the thing about them is they don't settle for lowball insurance offers from insurance companies, which is something.
Mention that you can submit a claim from your couch at home and on your phone.
Dan, they've completely modernized the process by submitting your claim, talking to your legal team. It's all done straight from your smartphone. Again, that's something
With
that
8 clicks or less.
8 clicks or less. Yes. You can see if you have a case in just a few minutes.
Hey, 1,000 lawyers. We have over 1,000 lawyers.
All right. You know what, Dan? If you really think you can do better, maybe you should just do it yourself.
What Jesse was getting at is if you've ever been injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less. To start your claim, just visit forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar.
You came a little too close to me. It hurt me a little bit. I'm probably actually going to have to hire you guys now, but that was well said. That was well said.
Now, during the trial, the couple's 3 children testified, and they testified about their parents' relationship. Their daughter, Sophia, who was home at the time of this deadly altercation, told the jury her father struggled with alcoholism, and that often led to fights between her parents. And she described the growing tension between the two after Michael had admitted to having an affair.
And do you remember typically what your parents would argue about?
About the drinking.
And what else?
The affair.
And the drinking, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about that. Do you recall how often your father would drink?
Every day.
And what he would drink?
Beers.
And is it fair to say he would not be drinking, as far as you know, while he was a firefighter, right?
Yeah.
When he would come home, would he have a few?
Yes.
What kinds of things would you hear your mother saying about the affair? when she would be questioning him or asking him?
I don't remember what she would ask about. I just remember like what it was about, but I don't remember what she would ask.
Okay. And is it fair to say that between the drinking and the affair, those were typically what the arguing was about?
Yes.
Okay.
And then Sophia talked about the day in question. She described this chaotic scene that unfolded on January 28th when she found her father dead on the floor inside of their home.
Other than I don't want to categorize it as yelling, but other than the loud voices you heard on the date of January 28th, 2021, what, if any, other sounds did you hear downstairs?
I heard movement and banging.
Movement and what?
Banging.
Banging?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know what the banging was?
No, I did not.
Okay. Where did you stay while you heard them? Is it fair to say they were yelling?
Yes.
So where were you during the yelling and the banging?
In my room.
At some point, did you leave your room, Sophia?
Yes, I did.
And why did you leave your room?
I heard my name being called.
Who called your name?
My mom.
Other than calling your name, did she yell anything else to you at that time?
No, she just called my name for me to come downstairs.
When you came downstairs, could you describe what you saw?
My dad was laying down on the floor.
And what was the very next thing that happened?
She told me to call 911.
And did you do that?
Yes, I did.
911 trying to go to the emergency.
My dad is injured on the ground. I don't know what's happened, but can you go to the ambulance or something?
Okay, where are you located?
679 Lorraine Street.
Say again?
679 Lorraine Street.
679 Lorraine Street?
Yes.
Okay, is he breathing?
Is he breathing, Mom? He's breathing.
Okay, stay on the line for me. I'm going to transfer the ambulance, all right?
Okay.
Now, on cross-examination, Ricci's defense noted alcohol and mental health issues that Michael was dealing with and the efforts that Ricci was making to help him, further emphasizing that despite their struggles, the couple was actively working on the relationship together and she wouldn't want him dead.
As time went on, right after the affair, is it fair to say that your mother was extremely upset about the affair, but also extremely upset about these memory issues and the drinking issues, right?
Yes.
And she seemed genuinely worried and upset and about your father's mental state
Yes.
and trying to figure out what went on.
Yeah.
And do you think, but as time went on, away from that, was there a change in the way that they fought? Meaning, I know that the subject matter might have been the same, but was the intensity of the fighting any different?
I don't recall.
Okay. You do recall, though, however, that they were going to counseling together, they were getting help, right?
Yes.
And in 2019, in October of 2019, they went and they renewed their vows, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
In Hawaii?
Yes.
Now, one of the responding officers testified that when he first arrived at the scene, he didn't know that Michael had been stabbed. He believed that he maybe suffered from some sort of medical episode, so he began performing CPR.
And at some point, did you speak to Christine Ricci?
Yes.
And what did she say to you?
She said that he was having a manic episode and then suddenly collapsed.
While Officer Kelly and Officer Hunt were rendering aid, namely, as you stated, chest compressions and I believe rescue breaths, what, if anything, did you observe on the ground near the alleged victim?
A 5-inch steak knife near his foot, approximately 2 feet.
And what, if anything, did you do when you saw the knife?
I didn't notice any blood or anything, but it had stayed there. At that time, again, it was still, in my mind, a medical.
And, okay.
What was your understanding of what he was being treated for?
A heart attack.
Did you have any further conversations with Christine Ricci once her husband had been taken out of the home and brought to the ambulance?
We attempted to speak with her, but she was, again, still frantic, hyperventilating.
And at some point, did her demeanor change at all?
Yes, she was able to, eventually, over time, able to calm down.
And by the way, initially, Christine Ricci told Martin that Michael had just collapsed. She made no mention of the fact that there was a knife that was plunged into Michael's chest until later on that evening.
I again asked her what had happened, and at that point she explained in further detail that an argument had ensued between the two. She believed he was becoming manic, so she picked up a steak knife because she was scared, and then at some point Michael lunged at her.
And what, if anything, did she indicate happened with the knife in her hand?
I don't recall. Oh, I'm sorry. It went into his chest. Yes.
And interestingly, I should tell you, Martin actually testified that if he knew Michael had been stabbed, he would have put Ricci in handcuffs immediately. Now, that part of his testimony was stricken because the defense objected to it, but interesting little side note there. Now, regarding these frequent altercations that have been occurring leading up to Michael's death, a number of witnesses testified that they had seen bruises and injuries to Michael's face.
And drawing your attention to the middle of 2019, what, if anything, drew your attention with regard to any injuries he had on him?
He reported to work one morning with 2 black eyes.
Had you ever seen him have black eyes before, sir?
No.
And how was his demeanor that day when he came in with the 2 black eyes?
I would describe it as somber.
Did you ever know Michael to be kind of a barroom brawler?
Never.
And was that the only time you saw Michael Ricci with injuries, sir?
No.
Physically, he looked like he didn't look good. In other words, he didn't look like the Mike I knew and everybody knew, to the point where we'd ask, is everything okay? Or pull him aside, is everything all right? Because he had scratches a lot on his face, a lot. He had a fat lip. He had a bleeding nose. One time we thought his nose was broken. We asked him if everything was all right, something you want to talk about.
And Michael's friend, Mark McDonald, recalled this one terrifying instance where Ricci called him and she was more than a little angry over her husband's affair.
And did you know her to be an individual that Michael had a brief affair with?
Didn't know it was an affair.
Or that he had some sort of relationship or friendship with? Now, during this conversation where you learned that Christine, the defendant, was trying to go to Janine's house, what was her tone during the course of that conversation?
Very angry, very, very angry.
And what were you doing to try to remedy the situation?
Well, I had her on the phone and I had her on speakerphone because it was kind of late at night. And, you know,
were you at home when you took the phone call?
My wife's right next to me, yes. So I put it on speakerphone so my wife could hear it. And then I told her maybe get Pembroke, because I didn't know what town it was. I was trying to narrow down what town she was in. I was going to tell my wife to maybe get the police on the phone.
And in one of the most dramatic moments of this trial, the woman that he was referring to, Michael's mistress, Janine Bouchard, she testified. And she testified on the moment that Christine Ricci confronted her at her own home about the affair.
She knocked on the door and I opened it and she said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Seriously?" And I realized it was her. So I stepped outside. She said, "I need to talk to you." So I stepped outside on the deck.
Was anyone else home?
I don't think so.
And how did she appear, namely Christine?
At first, started yelling and screaming. And then...
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So at first she was yelling and screaming. Was she, what was she yelling and screaming?
How could you do this to me? That was my husband. And Should I continue?
Did she say other things initially as well?
She was kind of all over the place. There was yelling and screaming.
So once the prosecution rested its case, Ricci opted actually not to testify in her own defense, and her attorneys rested without calling any witnesses. So they just relied on cross-examination of the state's witnesses. In closings, Ricci's defense reminded the jury that while she was devastated of the affair, she never wanted to hurt Michael. The prosecutor, on the other hand, argued that Christine Ricci ended the pain that she was feeling by ending the person that caused it, Michael Ricci.
That event, which began with a suicide attempt and ended with a struggle for the knife, which led the two of them to tumble off that stair, was never intended to be a stabbing of Michael. It was never intentional. The stumble was an accident, and the fall that created the penetrating force to let that knife go into Michael's body was an accident. Christine Ricci never intended to kill Michael. She never intended to stab Michael. What happened was an incredible tragedy that was the result of everything that was going on in the home for the previous 2 years.
As stated in the opening, ladies and gentlemen, by my sister here, Christine Ricci was like a simmering pot of anger, jealousy, rage, and control that boiled over on January 28, 2021. She spent 2 years doing everything in her control and power to control and isolate Michael Ricci. Yet she managed to lose all self-control in doing so. And ultimately, she picked up a knife, just like she had done on other occasions, showing that pattern, and killed her husband, Michael Ricci. That's why we're here. It's not a pile of dirt, ladies and gentlemen. It's their lives. Find me guilty.
Well, in the end, the jury agreed with the prosecution and convicted Christine Ricci of second-degree murder and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon.
What say you, Madam Forelady, as to indictment number 2183 CR 00153 on offense number 001, wherein the defendant, Christine Ricci, is charged with the crime of murder? Is she guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Guilty of what?
Murder in the second degree.
Thank you. As to offense number 002, wherein the defendant, Christine Ricci, is charged with the crime of assault and battery by means of a dangerous weapon, is she guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
And Christine Ricci was handed down a life sentence, but with the possibility of parole after 20 years. That was for the second-degree murder charge, and 6 years on the assault and battery with a dangerous weapon charge. For more gavel-to-gavel trial coverage, head to our Law&Crime YouTube page. You can check out everything there. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.